Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's stream, and I'd like you to help me welcome in our guest, Kelly, from Power Word Spill, which is the best YouTube channel name I've ever heard of. Thank you for joining me, Kelly. Yes, nerd stuff, all of it. So I got a set list of questions here that we can go through, but this is going to be sort of a loose, just hang out, talk about whatever. You started your YouTube channel like relatively recently. When was that? All right, all right. Yes, but growing very quickly. A lot of your content has been amazing. I've really enjoyed some of it, and I've even like learned a lot from watching them. But I have to ask, why did you start doing YouTube? I mean, as you've learned, it's a huge undertaking. So why did you start, and what keeps you going? Oh no, I'm not getting any sound from you. I knew I was gonna mess something up. Thanks, Alex. Let's see. And add audio output capture. Nope, that's not the. Okay, that and how about now? No. Oh no. Streamer's worst. I can still hear you, yes, and everyone can see you. Um. Wait, how about this one? How about now?
How about now?
Haha, there
Success?
we go.
Yay.
Success. Okay. Sorry about
Um,
that, and thank you, Alex, for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Where were we? Let's real quick.
Yeah,
What
I
is everything that I just said? Just repeat
yeah,
it.
rapid fire. I started in December, so
Uh-huh.
I've been on YouTube for about 9 months and really enjoying it so far. And why did I start? Why did I do this in the first place? Yeah, I've always really liked making videos, and I've always been for a very, very long time making videos for myself and then eventually as part of my job. And then, um, but I've been looking for a way to do that more, but without, um, I was a freelancer for quite a while, and doing a lot of client work can destroy your soul a little bit. So I was, I just, you know, finally decided that maybe YouTube was, I mean, it sounds weird to think that YouTuber could be a job at some point in the future, but it sounds like it is a real job that potentially I could have. So
Yeah.
yeah, I decided that I wanted to start a YouTube channel, and I've been playing. I'm still, I would say, comparatively a relative newcomer to D&D. I've been playing and DMing for about 5 years. So, I mean, compared to a lot of people who have been playing for like 20 plus years, I'm
Mm-hmm.
still very new. Um, but yeah, so I settled on something that I was really passionate about, and that I thought I had a lot of ideas, and that I thought I could, uh, you know, share a lot
Yeah.
in that, and that was what I landed on.
Um, I have. So it sounds like you wanted first and foremost to make a YouTube channel because of your background in making videos. But
Yeah.
which, by the way, it shows. Your videos are
Oh,
brilliantly edited, and I love
well,
like
thank
every
you.
second of them.
Thank
Um,
you very much. That's very
I
kind.
was the opposite. I was looking into. I had to learn all of the video editing stuff when I started my own channel, because the reason I started OKSDM was because I felt like I had things to say in the space, and
Yeah.
commenting on Reddit posts just was not rewarding at all, and I was
Yeah.
tired of it.
Yeah.
So I started the YouTube channel to specifically talk about TTRPG stuff, not necessarily because I enjoyed making videos.
Yeah.
That was a happy bonus that I found in the end. One
Well,
of my
that's
favorite things is just like learning new things, and
yeah.
there is so much that goes in creating. So it's
Yeah.
really
And
cool
there's
to
always
hear.
stuff to keep learning as well, which
Uh-huh.
is it's the thing that just keeps on giving. So yeah, I mean that's it's you're absolutely right. I share that. I really enjoy learning new things, and I find that very fulfilling. So
Mhm.
yeah, well, good on you for taking that on doubly then, because I mean it's been a lot of work, but I have a lot of the sort of the editing, familiar with editing software and stuff
Right.
like that, and for you to take that on and learn all that stuff is like that's a lot. So I commend you
It,
for
it
that.
was a lot. Well, I can't take all the credit because I have, those of you watching know, I've shied away from making actual videos, and I'm going much more towards live streaming content because I realized editing videos is a slog. It takes so long. It was a
Yeah.
steep learning curve that I really enjoyed climbing, but
Yeah.
now I'm sort of like, I feel like I'm giving up halfway through the mountain and switching over to a different mountain.
Not giving up though. I think that's I think that's a very smart and popular trend on YouTube, is to make longer form stuff, and then you have the option to clip everything out of it. And I think that's a really effective and smart way to go about it. So I
Thanks.
wouldn't call that giving up at all.
Yay! I'll make shorts out of something at some point. I
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
So we didn't come here to bore our audience with the behind the scenes content of what the life of a YouTuber is like. We came here to talk about somehow even nerdier things in D&D
That's right.
and other tabletop role-playing games. So my next question I had on our list here was the title of the video is Capitalizing on GM Strengths. So what are your strengths, and how did you identify them as things you're good at, like as part of running games?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess as far as how I identified them, I after you sent me that question, I went and asked my wife what she thought I was good at in
Yeah.
DMing, because I DM for her. So yeah, I mean, I have an idea of what I think I'm good at, but I'm always curious to hear when I check in with my players and ask, what they enjoy about it, about the session. Sometimes not every session, but I'll do like, a post session question where I'll ask them
Mhm.
what they had
Mhm.
fun with, what maybe wasn't as fun. So um, yeah, I think just initially, the first part of that is what you think you're good at, and then but also checking that against maybe what other people's perceptions are, because sometimes they're the same, but not always. So
Mhm.
um, as far as how to identify that for yourself, I think for me, what I find the easiest and what comes easily when I'm prepping, and then what flows the best in the session, is what I think my strengths are. And for me, that is improv and improvising NPCs, and just when I sort of step away from my prep a little bit and I have room to just improvise. Um, and so yeah, I think that's where my strengths are, and during the session I feel that when things are flowing and I can look across the table and I see that my players are engaged and that they're having fun, and so that's where I make mental note of those moments. Like, what am I doing in that moment where everyone's really engaged? It looks like they're having fun, and I take those, and I'm a I like to analyze things afterward a lot in my head, so I just bounce things around. So after a session, I'll just kind of go through it in my head and think about what I what felt good and what didn't feel good, and so those parts that feel good are what I would identify as my strengths. And for me, that has boiled down to improvisation, I think.
I resonate a lot with that, especially the started off answering this question with I talk to my player. That is like one of the best things that any GM can do is like talk to your players, not necessarily in the session.
Yeah.
You talk to them outside the session and just ask, what do you enjoy about my games? And this is something that I do every now and then, even with people that have been playing with me for years.
For sure.
They'll keep saying the same things, but sometimes they'll say something new. Like lately, I've noticed that your blank has gotten much better, and it's every single time I've asked, the feedback has always been overwhelmingly positive. And I feel like that's the case. I mean, you're all sitting down there at a table to have fun, so the feedback, they're going to remember the good stuff. So I, as well as, I also really enjoy improvising. Lately, I've been running games where I used to prep all the time, just over prep, so much stuff that never got opened up, never got looked at, and it just didn't feel like I was doing the right work. So when I started doing YouTube and started having less and less and less time to prep, what I did was I went to a bunch of communities and ran a bunch of games for strangers where I did no prep. I was not allowed to look at anything, except for their characters 10 minutes before the game started. That's it. That's all I have to go on. And there's a couple of articles on my Patreon about this. One of them, I could not think of anything, so I literally dropped a Tarrasque on a 4th level party. And it was an insane and wonderful session, but I've started to get used to that improv of like making it up on the spot, and I think just practicing that has made that part of my games that much better, because now even in games that I do plan, the fact that I can improv that much better, there's so much that you have to improv anyway.
Absolutely.
So you don't have to improv the whole game, but improving a whole game has been very helpful to the games that aren't all improv as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's a certain feeling of freedom that comes when you have that confidence to step away from your prep and just like say, oh, my players are going a different direction, but you know what, I'm confident in my own improv abilities, that I'm not going to panic. It's fine. Like, I'm just going to follow them. We're going to go where they're going to go, and that's okay. And improvising a whole session is certainly a great way to force yourself to rip off that that safety harness.
Yep.
Like
it's scary. It's
go
scary
for
the first
it.
couple
It is
times.
Scary. Yeah, absolutely. And running on top for strangers is extra scary. I
just stepped as far outside of my box as I could. And it worked out, thankfully.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like our styles are very, very similar, which is not that surprising. I feel like it's the style across most people that are both content creators and dungeon masters. But now that you've identified improv as one of your best skills for like running your games, as opposed to maybe world building or like detailed prep to make sure you're prepared for everything, you're improvising. So how do you change the way that you run games to suit that strength?
Yeah, I think, and I definitely do prep still.
Yes, it's not necessarily all improv all the time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I think just leaving, specifically with improv, just leaving space in the prep to have that flexibility. Um, I think it's changed a bit how I prep once I was a bit more comfortable. I like I I don't know. I don't know if this is common or not, but I like to prep down to a very extreme detail in very specific cases, and then other times I'll just like leave a big gap in which I know I'm going to connect those dots, but I'm going to improv my way there. So like if I have something that I think is really important for the story, I will prep, like, and I'll even, monologue to myself in the shower about what I think this person is gonna say,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just like come up with speech ideas in my head. And so, in that way, I will prep, and think about what they're wearing and think about really specific details. But then it's like nothing. They're gonna have this interaction. I'm thought it through a lot, and then they're gonna end up at this next interaction, but I just don't know how they're gonna get there, and I'm gonna improv everything along the way. So for me, that is what I found has worked really well, is a combination of detailed prep and then gaps that where I have space to improvise, and then another detailed chunk of prep. And then, if they go somewhere else, then I can move this over here, or like they go a different way, I can take another chunk that I've prepped and just put it in here. So I kind of have these pieces that I can play with, and then just improvise in how the order that they're going to come in and how people are going to get there. So that it has, once I kind of took the safety harness away and felt comfortable improvising, it did change the way I prepped, in that just leaving more room for that. So
Yeah.
whatever your skill is, I think, um, uh, you know, to just leave room in your prep for it. If it's world building, then prep, do your world building prep, because I mean that's also probably the thing that you enjoy the most as well, is whatever you're really good at. Generally, I would think you would enjoy it as well. So yeah, I'd say just leaving room for it in your prep.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like my way is somewhat similar to yours, where there's very, very specifically built points, and you improv from point to point.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, those points are always the beginning of the session, and sometimes maybe the end of the session. So
Right. Yeah.
I improv from A to B instead of
Yeah.
like having multiple points along the way. So when I do my prep, not every time, when I do my prep properly, um, I will have, a session summary and setting the scene for the beginning of that session. I will have like at least half a page, probably a full page, maybe more, of like, usually it's just something that I read out loud. Where I write it down beforehand, read it through once, edit it a little bit. And that sometimes I will also have that for like a specific event that I had in mind, like a climax for a story, where a thing is happening and sort of like the world freezes while this thing happens. And I can pick out multiple instances where that has happened in long past campaigns that I still remember. So having that, I feel you're not alone in doing the very, very specific prep for this one moment. And we'll improv the rest of it. And that one moment isn't, for me at least, always like the best part of the session. In fact, it almost never is. It's having the players around to improv with you, essentially. Always
Absolutely.
a ton of fun.
Absolutely, and that is that's definitely something that's come from improving more, is that if there's more room for them to make more meaningful impact on the story when you are a bit more flexible. Because if they come in with an idea that's like, whoa, I didn't consider that, you can run with that if you like it on the spot. And so yeah, certainly.
Now let's hop to the opposite side of the spectrum, the more difficult stuff. And I'm going to be asking the same two questions. What are your weaknesses in running games, and how did you identify them?
I mean, I would say my biggest weakness for sure is encounter design and encounter balance and encounter design. And I think it's, I mean, certainly comes from my being, newer to the game, and it's getting better at the more I run and the more I play and just the more different situations that I see. But absolutely, it's just that initially was so foreign to me. Just like it was, look, how I got into D&D was my wife and I went on a road trip, and she was a big fan of College Humor, and then she said, "Oh, these people from College Humor are putting on this D&D podcast, so we should listen to it." And then it just came out, like the first 5 or 6 episodes, and that was Not Another D&D Podcast. And so we listened to it, and we were like, "Oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. We need to play this immediately." So we messaged some friends when we got back and said, "Hey, this." I don't know if any of you have played D&D, but we want to play D&D. And one of them had played, or a couple of them had played maybe a couple sessions, but really none of us knew what we were doing. So we all got together and we just started playing D&D, and that is still the group that I play in. And so initially, coming at it with 6 people that have no idea how to play D&D, the whole concept of encounter design and balance and everything was just like, I mean, it was,
it's wildly confusing and notoriously bad in 5th edition. So it's always been difficult for me as well.
Yeah. So how did I identify that? It was just the hardest part of it. The storytelling, I really like imagining stories and creating stories, and world building, similarly, that stuff really excites me, and the role playing and improvising, that all really excites me. And then to sit down, I find it exciting and interesting, but I also just find it really difficult. So as far as how did I identify that, it was just the thing that I found every session, especially in the beginning. I would have an encounter and I'd go, "Oh, well, this didn't go at all the way I thought." Like all of a sudden, either it was just wildly swinging one way or the other. It was like, "Oh, okay, well, they just
almost
killed...
a TPK, or no one got hit once."
Exactly. And so that was pretty easy for me to identify that, because it was just glaringly obvious. So yeah, but in a more general sense, I think it's just looking at what you find. I think, it's just you're going to find some aspects more difficult in when you prep, and then when you get to the table, they just don't go the way you thought. And that could be role play, that could be character creation, with your NPCs. Like, "Oh, I think this character is going to be really cool," and then you bring them to the table, and then it just falls flat. So I think it's just, paying attention while you're playing. Kind of initial same thing, saying it again, but just paying attention while you're playing, and watching your players to see what they engage with, because that you're doing a good job if you see everyone just locked in on you or each other when there's a moment happening, and just take note of what's going on. And similarly, I mean, worst case scenario, someone takes out their phone or something at the table, and you're like, "Oh, I really lost them here." But
something's going wrong here.
Yeah. But so yeah, just watching your players and seeing what they engage with is, I think, a great way to figure out your strengths and weaknesses.
I agree. It's very much, you have to, again, back to communication, asking your players, what do you, I know what you enjoy about my game. Won't stop talking about it. What can I fix? What's broken? And sometimes it's hard to get your players to think about that, because they don't like they're not paying attention, and that's the problem. So they're not going to remember those.
Exactly.
But you touched on for in-person games, it's very obvious when someone takes their phone out, and I feel like that's all, that one little notifier for me is like, okay, something needs to change like soon.
Yeah.
I'm doing something wrong. We need to switch up the pacing or do something about it. I love your story of how you you started watching with I've heard it called NADPOD.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not something I've watched Dimension 20 and there are other stuff, but that's one that I haven't gotten into. It's, again from the top, has eclipsed everything.
Yeah,
making content takes so much time, and I just wish I had more time to watch all my friends' content. But
I know
a D&D session is 3 hours long. You do it every week, and it makes a lot of content very fast. So I think identifying those weaknesses is important for any person that is running their games. Encounter design has also been an absolute mess for me until I just threw all of it out of the window and focused on, instead of like trying to balance it beforehand with like a calculator, online encounter calculator, like, okay, my party is this level, I should make it slightly more than deadly just because of how I run it. And that doesn't always work anymore. So lately what I've been doing is I look at what the hit points are supposed to be for the monster, and I will say, okay, this is about where they're going to end up. And once they start getting close to that, instead of actually like calculating, okay, there's only 2 health left, the next hit is probably going to kill it. I don't want that to be like an oops, they stubbed their toe and died. So what I've been doing is waiting for an attack that is actually cool and epic, and whatever attack is the first attack that seems awesome, once they start approaching that maximum health, then that's the one that's going to down them. Even if it's like 50 hit points later, like this combat went way too long, but no one's been doing anything cool. So I've just been avoiding the calculation entirely, and it's now designing my own game. It's starting to bite me in the ass because it's like really, really hard to design.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then you're like not sure. Ooh, is it like that was cool, but is the next one gonna be cooler? Like
earlier today, I was at my local game store running Sagas, the game I'm designing for a group of in-person people. It's the first in-person game I've ever done for it. But I threw 2 medium dragons at them at a party of 6 level 1s, and they won like a little too easily. And so I said, okay, they won. Let's say Mom shows up. So I threw a large dragon in there, and it just wiped the floor with them. I'm like, okay, there's something wrong here. Those 2 should be about the same. So I have to go into the mechanics and start mathing it out, which is going to take a while, but I'm still looking forward to it. Encounter design is a mess. I haven't found a system that does it well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your strategy there, I think, is what I was going to bring up as well. Another option is that I've taken to doing lately is, instead of trying to bring out like everyone at once and just be like, this is what the encounter is. There's 6 goblins. There's a hobgoblin over there, and there's this. Is to bring them out piecemeal, like, okay, well, this is the first part of the encounter, and these people are going to be here the first round, and then I have these other groups waiting in the wings. I'll think of story reasons ahead of time what might draw them in, and then depending on how that first round goes, I can choose to either bring in other monsters or not. If it's going poorly, then I won't bring in anyone else, and if it's going too easily, then maybe I'll bring in more people. And that also I found helps make it a bit more dynamic as well, because after my goal lately has been every round something different should happen, because I've run way too many combats that they're like 10 rounds long, and the last 8 rounds everyone just stood still and swing. Just So my goal lately has been I want something different to happen every single round, and so I found bringing the monsters in piecemeal has been really helpful in allowing me to balance encounters on the fly. And then I mean, obviously once you add them, you can't go back, but so you just want to be careful about adding too many, but at least you won't make it worse. But I think your thing as well about being a little bit looser with the hit points and waiting for that cool moment, I think is super common as well. And my friend who DMs in our group absolutely does that as well, and it leads to some really fun moments, because you just wait, and eventually someone's gonna try and leap off the cliff and do some kind of
like,
cast
I'll take the fall damage, just I want to stab him from above.
So and those lead to some epic moments. So I think there's no wrong answer, just finding the system that works for you and trying out different things. Every time you run a combat, you can just try something else and see what works, what doesn't.
Absolutely. I don't think there are very few monsters that I've actually run more than once, just because there are so many. Even with just like the core books, just the monster manual alone, there's so much stuff in there. Start adding on the supplements that came from Wizards of the Coast. Start adding on the third-party supplements. And there's so much content. You will be able to find the right monster for the right situation, enough where you should never need to run the same thing twice. I mean, I'll always have like a special place in my heart for wolves and goblins. Your low level, classic I want to learn the game kind of encounter. But once they get past that, it's I discovered the Atropole recently on D&D Beyond, which is it's weird, it's crazy. Look it up sometime. I almost killed the entire party with exhaustion.
That's an exhaustion spiral is in 5e.
Yes, it's very quick death spiral, and it was a great encounter. It was it was a climax for a campaign actually, and like you said, I had all the different stuff waiting in the wings. I had like 7 different monsters pulled up ready to go, because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I knew I was going to have to throw something big in there, but I didn't know what. And I'll just figure out what happens. And I feel like it's a good example of how you can both change the game to improve, like focus on your strength and avoid your weaknesses at the same time. So because I had to improv which monster I was going to use, and I didn't have to design the encounter before. Playing it by ear has, the more I've done it, it's been much easier to do an encounter by ear instead of like calculate, because the calculations just don't work. There's too many variables.
Yeah, there is. And the other thing that's also helpful is like what happened at the end of a campaign, and I 90% of the time play with the same players, is learning how your players play is so valuable, because you said earlier, adding like a multiplier to the CR or XP when you were doing it that way, you were saying that didn't really work for you. That I kind of sort of figured out, like it had to be 1.5 times deadly XP for my party, just because of the amount of magic items I'd thrown at them, and they just had a bunch of resources. But just learning how your players play is so valuable. So I think it's also natural for the encounters to get better as you progress through a campaign if you're able to play with the same players, because you learn them and they learn you. So it's
you know
I think
whether
that's
they're
part of
you
it.
know the strategies they use that work and how powerful they are to make sure that you scale the difficulty appropriately.
Yeah, and some players are super interested in figuring out combinations and spell combos and like making powerful builds and everything. And some players just want to RP, and so it's important to learn, like, just because your party is high level, maybe they don't actually use a lot of their abilities because they're really more interested in RP. So yeah, just learning your players will absolutely, um, I think, is invaluable.
And I want to ask more about that because lately it's been a while now since I've played a longer campaign with like the same group of people that I've known for a long time. So I want to ask, how do you incorporate understanding players' tendencies into the game to make it better? Because I've been, like I said, running games for strangers a lot, like running only mini series. But the more you learn about them, what do you change about your game to make it better for them and for you?
Yeah, I really try to. I feel like I'm always saying the same thing, but I really try to um, look and see, because each of the players in my group, I think, are quite different. They all like different things.
Okay.
Some of them really like to RP, and that is what they like most about D&D. And then some of them really like the crunch, and that's what they like most about. I say D&D because that's what we play. I mean,
Mm-hmm. It
I'd say
applies
that's
to
about 95% of
all
what
the
I
other
play.
stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, some of them really like the crunch, and they like magic items and figuring out what the combos are, and some of them are just there for the story, and they just they like to be there and they want to be told a story. So how did I go about learning what each of them liked? I was just throwing paint at the wall and just trying a bunch of stuff and just watching each of them and just kind of getting an idea of what each of them engaged with, what each of them wanted. It's once you see someone go from this to this, all of a sudden it's like, okay, I got you. I have your number.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just try to prep my sessions, and I literally just try and think about each player, and I try and throw something in for each of them. If for the people that like magic items, a little bit of, I go through and find not powerful items, but just interesting items, like utility items that I find are, I just think, oh, there would be a perfect situation and they would find it, so I'm going to give them this. So every session I just try and do something for every single player. And that was the way I went about it.
Something for every single player. That's good. I've tried to do that in the past. I just haven't had the brain space for it. Like I will forget to do this one thing for one player, and I think it's another one of my weaknesses of lately, because of I've been trying to improv everything. I've been leaning a bit too far down that hole, and I've started to realize that I could have prepared this. I could have prepared something, and this would have gone much. It's a balance that I'm personally still finding.
Yeah, and me too. And I definitely don't want to give the impression that I nail that every time. I definitely, that's just what I strive for. No, for sure. That's what when I go into my prep, I strive to do that. But once the reality is, sometimes you run out of time. Sometimes the thing that you thought you could do for them, the party didn't go there, so it didn't work out. But I try to do that. And then if you try to do that every session, then it usually works out that every few sessions you manage to hit everyone's thing. So, but yeah, I mean the balance is huge, and I'm similarly just like a rubber band, just kind of, you know, always.
Feast or
I've never.
famine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, we've got a question in the chat from Christopher Stallings. Thank you so much for joining us. How do we deal with a player that is an exceptionally lucky dice roller or adjusting play for or combat for hot or cold streaks on rolls? So I've definitely been in this situation before where you get that player that just rolls crap constantly. The whole session, maybe multiple sessions in a row, and is just starting to feel down on their luck. How do you fix that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do a lot with advantage and disadvantage, giving them like coming up with reasons to give them advantage or disadvantage depending on their. I mean, you know, if they're rolling really hot and super lucky, I mean, unless you have some reason to not trust this person, if it's in person and you're seeing them roll the dice and they're just really lucky, you know what? I would just let it go, and you know, if it's really affecting my encounter balance, then I would, you know, just try and ratchet up the difficulty a little bit, or maybe look into their character sheet and just see, you know, if they have any, if they're just stealing the show because they're rolling so lucky, maybe I would just try and choose monsters that focus on their weaknesses a little bit more, so then it kind of disproportionately affects them, but maybe with their rolls it'll level the playing field. And then on the reverse, you could also apply that to the reverse. If someone is just rolling really poorly, you could try and look and see what, you know, what their build is like, and come up with an encounter that would favor their strengths. Come up with monsters that would that are susceptible to their attacks, or an environment that they are especially strong in, or just a type of encounter that they are especially good in, and then just think of ways to give them advantage. You know, if whether it's through inspiration or whatever rules you have at your table for giving advantage, that can, I mean, yeah, advantage and disadvantage are definitely there to level the playing field with the dice. So I would absolutely utilize that.
I would agree heartily with that. Specifically, a couple things. First, to the advantage disadvantage, inspiration is a fantastic tool that I always forget to use. Like every time, like I feel like when I could have used inspiration to reward something cool happening, you can like lower the bar if someone's having a rough time with their rolls, and like when they get awarded inspiration. At the beginning of every session, I have a special like black and gold D20. I got like 6 of them, and I will hand those out to the players, and those are inspiration that they can award each other, which has been very useful because I will always forget, and they have less on their plate. Like a player's gonna have less on their plate than almost every time. So they are much less likely to forget that inspiration is a tool, and when they award inspiration, it reminds me like, oh yeah, I can do that, and it's been really helpful. I had something else. It was about, you mentioned when balancing encounters towards strengths and weaknesses depending on whether they're being unlucky or lucky in the moment. I had a really, really high level campaign, at least really, really high level for me. It was like level 13 or something. And they were facing off against a dire troll, which if you've read that stat block, it's a mess. It is terrifying. They hadn't figured out that it was a troll yet. So they dropped it to 0 hit points, and then it got back up and used its whirlwind ability, which is like 7d8 damage or something like that on a single target. And it dropped the paladin, it dropped the tank, and they thought the combat was over, and then one of them almost dies. The reason that I got to do that cool thing was because I had finally figured out a way to stop the ranger from running away and shooting and running away and shooting and running away and shooting. And just because, like, somehow the ranger was, like, way maybe more strategically better or getting luckier with rolls that day. But they were fighting a dire troll in the room, like CR 13 or something. And I had a dark mantle, which is a CR 1/4, little tiny, like, bat that just wraps around your head, blinds and suffocates you. And it's supposed to be super, super easy to get rid of. But this ranger's strength is dexterity, and you needed strength, which was his dump stat, to get this thing off. And he spent like 4 turns being unable to do anything because he was blind. So everything, he couldn't target anything. It finally put him out of commission for a bit because he'd been stealing the spotlight from the rest of the players for so long. So finding that like one monster stat block that is just bane of a player is a useful tool to have in your bag for when they're getting more than their 15 minutes worth table.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true. You should also have some monsters that one specific player will just mow down with ease, especially when, like, damage vulnerabilities come into play. There's not a lot with them, but it is fun to know, like, which ones those are. So if your fire mage is about to die, you can throw in something that is weak to fire, some sort of ice something or other. And they will get their last huzzah in after rolling like crap and almost dying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's excellent to throw in a CR 1/4 that just zips around and just helps balance everything out. And you don't want to do that. As far as targeting a player that's doing a lot better, you don't want to do that too much. Otherwise, they're going to get frustrated.
Yeah, they'll get frustrated. Like the player that I did that to was frustrated. I didn't expect it to work so well for 4 rounds of not being able to do anything. So like that was something I could not control. At least I felt I couldn't without giving it an obvious. Oh, he just loosens his grip and the DC is now 9 instead of 14.
And
I didn't want to do that obvious, like, you're struggling, here's your stick. Kind of.
And
that also
to have them struggle for combat, I think is great. And then just as long as you're not the person who asked the question, just as long as you're not based on the question, I would address it more as an issue if a player is really struggling, or if they're just, like in your case, was just stealing the spotlight because they were so good or so lucky. But I think if there's any disparities, like closer to the median, then I wouldn't worry about it. Some people are going to just have hot sessions, and some people are going to have bad roll sessions. And as long as it's not every session, and then you want to address it. But definitely the randomness of the dice are always going to come into play, but only if it's a consistent problem, I would address it.
Exactly. And this isn't the only way to solve it either. Like sometimes if your table is that kind that really enjoys the roleplay, you can switch from your combat to do just that. Because sometimes you don't need to roll the dice in order to have a good time. So if someone's having like there's that disparity between really good rolls and really bad rolls, you can just role play and let the party banter among themselves, and don't throw any difficult social encounters at them or anything. Nothing that will require a roll, or just like, instead of rolling for it, just role play through and talking in character. Obviously that's not going to work for every table, because there's going to be a lot of people that don't feel comfortable talking in character. They just don't want to. In that case, there are other solutions talked about. But the answers that we're giving here are not the end all be all. They're just
Definitely not.
suggestions.
And I love your inspiration with the special dice and having the players award it to each other. And one thing that my group does, which is similar, at the end of every session, each player, we just kind of go around and we make it a inspiration train, and you just say something that you liked that a person did that session, and you give them inspiration, and that way everyone goes into the next session having one point of inspiration that they can use whenever they want. And it's a nice way to end a session with a nice feel good compliment train where you get complimented on something that you did, and you give a compliment to something that another player did that you liked.
Yeah. So even if it's a bad session, it ends in.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Because bad
that
sessions do happen.
definitely, absolutely.
Let's see if we got any other questions in chat. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of stories about tables. Chris runs a game for his wife and 3 kids when COVID started, and it was in full force, and he pretends to not know what he's doing, so trying to really pay attention. I can. There's a lot of conversation to be had about, did you do that on purpose? Especially with our improv styles, we say,
Absolutely.
yeah, I've all planned.
Yeah, and I think there are lots of different opinions on that. As far as whether you should have some magic of like DM magic going on and just kind of lean into that a bit. I've been on both ends of that, and I think as a player, I like to think that the DM planned it everything.
Yeah,
when something
fun.
crazy happens, and when I'm playing at tables and something crazy happens, and the DM just goes, whatever thing just comes out, and they're like, "Ooh,"
To see that
and
smile, and
yeah. That feeling I really like. So as a DM, I've decided to stick with that a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to take credit for something that's just totally improbable, but just being a little coy, I think, is a fun relationship to have with your players.
Keeping the mystery behind the screen, is something that I actually struggle with. I feel like I'm too honest all the time. It's like, no, actually, that was all improv, and the players are like, don't tell us that. Come on.
Well, and yeah. So the flip side of that coin, though, I think, is that from a person that doesn't DM, it can make it really intimidating to DM if you're always thinking like, oh, like I can't even imagine how they planned this multi-webbed, thing that they then revealed to us. It's like, yeah, so I'm of two minds, because I think as well it can make it inaccessible for someone who hasn't DM'd before. And there are players in my group who half of us have DM'd and run games for our group, and then the other half haven't. And I'm always encouraging the other half to try it, but and so I'm of two minds of presenting too much of a like what I do back here is magic, because it's not. You can do it too. And so yeah, I guess that's a great point. I'm of two minds of it.
And the viewers listening are probably GMs themselves, but if you're not, everything we do is when we're flying by the seat of our pants. We have no clue what's going on ever. That's our secret. You can do it too.
You can do it too. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think it's about time to call it for a short break. I think we'll take 5-10 minutes, maybe get some new questions going up through the chat that we can answer when we come back, and I'll think of some as well. We'll step away, and you should step away too, listeners. Go get something to drink, stretch, do what you need to do, and we will be back at about 5 past the hour. Thank you for listening, and don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for sticking around if you never left. Hope you got your water, your snack, and your stretch in. Chat has been blowing up in the meantime. You guys have not let me down. We've got more than 7 questions, so we might have to start doing some... a couple of these are going to be rapid fire, but if they spark a conversation or we don't get through all of them, sorry. We love talking about this, so...
We'll do our best.
All right, first one up from Alex. Do you prefer to sit in the GM chair or sit as a PC, and of course, why?
Oh,
Yeah, that's a good one.
I don't know that I can answer that. I like them both so much for different reasons. I like to do both. In my group right now, we've been kind of taking turns running campaigns, and so I've been a player for a little bit in our longer campaign, which has been so wonderful, and it's given me so much time to think of ideas for the campaign that I want to run next. So I ran a 1 to 20 campaign, and then I was a little burnt out by the end of that. And then in the meantime, I ran some shorter things and one-shots and things like that. And then I got to be a player for a long time, and it has rejuvenated my desire to write a campaign and do all of that stuff. So I like them both so much, and I would not want to give up either for different reasons.
I think I'm the same, where I definitely like both of them a lot. For me, though, it really depends on the day, which is unfortunate. Like, sometimes I'm in the GM seat, and I'd rather just be... sometimes that works. Sometimes I can convince one of the players to throw together a quick one-shot so that I get to play for once. It's happened maybe, like, twice in 9 years of running games.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I've had a long day and I'm burnt out, sometimes I just don't feel like running it. I just want to sit back and enjoy the story that's happening around me and not be required to give input on everything.
Yeah.
But I also, flip side of that, obviously thoroughly enjoy being the one that's involved in every single piece of the story, and the one that gets to wrap their world around these characters in whatever way I think will benefit story. So yes, both. I don't want to ever be a forever GM or forever player. I want to juggle both as much as I can, which means I'm usually the GM, but that's just how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with GMing, it feels a bit like you're playing this kind of like chess match against a bunch of different people, and I think that tickles my brain in a very specific way, and that I think is the feeling of running a really great session and then finishing and being like, oh wow, okay, yes, that went really well. They were all engaged, and all the pieces that I wanted to lay down came in. I think that is the thing that I like most about GMing, and I don't think I would ever give up that high that I get from running a good session.
All right,
and then from being a player, I would love to know what your favorite aspects are as well. But yeah, for being a player, just the feeling, like you said, of getting lost in the story, and sometimes you just forget, that you're just sitting around a table or on a Discord call or whatever, and you're just talking to people, and it's just the world is alive in your mind, and I get lost in the story more playing TTRPGs than I do in any other medium, like books or movies. I find I just completely am enveloped in it, and I think that's my favorite piece as being a player. And I'd love to know what your each favorite piece about being a GM and player is as well.
Favorite pieces. I think favorite piece about being a player is taking all of the skills that I've learned through listening to stories and creating stories, through not just TTRPGs but other mediums, TV shows, movies, books, and taking all of those skills and pouring everything that I have into a single character instead of spreading it out across an entire world party across a long time. Because that, I feel like when you pour everything you have into a single character, it becomes like this one single point, this obsession with a name, that you can give your all for. I'm lucky enough to be in a weekly streamed game of Pathfinder over on Mistress Winter's Court on Twitch. And Archie, this halfling back alley doctor that I've created, has been, I don't think I've ever played one character that long. And I'm starting to get why people love these long campaigns from the player's side. And it's like it feel like you're in the story instead of writing it. Very different experience. I think that's the best way I can describe the different seats, and I love being inside it. Favorite part about GMing is real tough question. I would have to say being able to trusting that my storytelling ability is good and I can tell a quality story, and that feeling of knowing that my players are trusting me to do that is something that I really like. They know that whatever I do next is going to be and just that utmost confidence that they have in me after running a game for time. Probably my favorite part about being in the GMC. Now, saying this out loud becomes ironic to me that I am not currently running any long-term campaigns. Everything is miniseries and one-shots, and but that's just something I've had to give up for marketing the game that I'm running. And you know, I'm definitely going to be, like, I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking for like a lot of experienced streamers to join me together and start an actual long campaign. So because I just miss it. I want to get back into something like that.
And there's lots of time for it too. So you know, there's we got a lot of games left to play in our lives. So there's there will be a lot of time for long campaigns.
All right, question 2 of about 10.
All right, nice.
Kelly, you mentioned meeting your players' individual wants on the game, whether it's combat, story, puzzles, etc. Understanding that you lean on improv, which is your favorite to prep for?
To prep for and not to play. Interesting. I like prepping story is the thing that I like prepping the most. I like thinking about the story beats that I want to hit in my campaign and the twists that I want to make, and the idea of sharing that when I come up with an idea that I think is really good, the excitement, it makes me excited to share it with my players and to get whatever reaction I'm trying to get out of them. So I think prepping story is my favorite piece. I think that's got to be it. But right now, like I said earlier, I'm really trying to work on my encounter design and make them more exciting. So just like learning any new skill, practicing and revising I also find very rewarding. So prepping encounters right now is very fun, just because I have been watching other D&D, whether it's Dimension 20, we watch that a lot, or listening to NADPod. or just watching other content creators and seeing how they do things. I have like little ideas that I want to incorporate into my own encounters, and so that is exciting to me right now. But I think overall, prepping story is my favorite part. Coming up with a really good twist.
Yes, and I those in hindsight, those are all of my favorite individual moments in games that I've run. The moment that they find out that the leader of the rebellion is actually a dragon. Those the reactions, the gasp, being able to elicit that emotion of surprise and whatever comes after that is one of the most rewarding things. But I don't think for me that is the thing I enjoy prepping the most. For me, I think it's world and lore. I really enjoy preparing for my players to discover. And after many years now of writing that sort of thing, I am glad that has been one of my favorites, like consistently throughout it, because after years of writing world, there's no way you're going to remember everything. So sometimes when I'm going back through notes, like looking for inspiration for, this new area that they're going to, like, have I written anything for this area yet? And I'll go through and like, oh, that's so cool. Just like rediscover this society that I built 5 years ago and forgot.
That's very cool.
So
and that's
for me, I think it's cool.
That's very cool. And when in some ways, when you are really interested in world building and that's your passion, then it can make a lot of the other pieces fall into place, like automatically, just because of the design of the world and stuff. So I would also like to. I want to improve every facet of my GMing, but I would like to improve the amount of world building that I do as well. The woman who is DMing right now in our group is very excellent at world building, and she has built so much that we haven't even touched on, and it just but there are so many details that just kind of come up naturally then, because it's all in her head, and so it just makes the world feel that much more alive when you can just be like, reference this thing offhand and be like, oh, of course, this NPC just referenced this thing. It's like, well, what is that thing? We've never even heard of it. Oh yeah, well, it's just this whole other thing that's going on in the world that you don't even know about, because I went on a tangent and I wrote this huge thing as part of the world. It's prepping a lot of world building will make, I think, it's like running a pre-written campaign at that point. You're like, you have everything there for you. So
all the beats are inside your head, and it's like pockets are full of little bits of interesting things happening. Next question. Back to encounters. How do you clue your players in that an encounter was designed to be too much for them before they TPK themselves? Thank you, Chris. This is something that I think I'm going to have a lot of talking about.
I would love to hear your answer on this, because I have definitely been in that situation, and there are definitely just sometimes, if you feed your players, I guess I'll give you my take on it, but I've definitely fed my players too many encounters in a row where they could absolutely win, and then they were just in the mindset of being like, oh, well, he put the encounter in front of us, so we must be able to win it, otherwise we wouldn't be here. That sort of metagame mindset comes in. I think for me, the way I have gone about it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, is to start early in the campaign with the notion that there are encounters that you will not be able to win and you need to run. So if you get through 10 levels and then all of a sudden you throw your first encounter that they need to run from, then it's like, oh well, this is, maybe we're just supposed to fight, to the death, and then eventually something will happen. And then the other thing is just in the description, to really amp up the description of how terrifying or brutal whatever it is that you have put in front of them truly is, and just truly describing it as unwinnable, I think would be how I'd go about it. But I'd love to hear your take.
I think that the description is also important, but for me there's a little asterisk by that, and that's that I've never been able to improv that. If I'm relying on the description to show the players that it's something that they cannot win, it's an obstacle that they cannot overcome, I need to write it out before. I'm not that good at coming up with the correct vocabulary and saying the right thing to impress the correct emotions on the players themselves about this is terrifying, you need to run. Without just saying, you get the feeling you need to run from this. Because that's always an option, but it's like, it feels like a cop-out sometimes.
I mean, absolutely asking for an insight check and just giving them that information is also definitely a way to do it, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. The question doesn't actually mention running specifically, and I've run TPKs a lot, but they're on purpose.
Okay.
The first one I did, I remember they fought the BBEG way too early. They found out, oh, this is the Lich. We just got to go kill the Lich and then we'll be done. So they found out where the Lich lives and they went over to get him. And so I'm like, okay, I'm preparing this encounter. This is a long time ago, so I was still preparing everything. And I was bad at balancing it, and they were supposed to lose, and they started getting close to winning. And so I said, the Lich says a single word, strange language, and you see all of his wounds suddenly heal completely.
Okay.
And I'm like, they started being like, wait, hang on, what? And so thankfully I only had to do that once, and they got the gist that, like, oh, this was a mistake.
Unwinnable.
We're screwed. And the classic power word kill, always good, is like, oh, how many hit points do you have? You die.
Yeah.
Do I get nope? You die.
Yeah.
So the other one thing that I really, really like using, press upon the players that this combat is not winnable, is automatic damage or automatic status effects. Like, you don't get a save against this. He's not making attack roll. Just take 40 damage. That's how it works. And they realize that quickly this is not something. And it doesn't necessarily, like, I know the Marut or Merit stat block, the giant golems from the Plane of Law who are tasked with bringing people who break those contracts back to the Plane of Law. They have things in their stat block for their force punch or something is just an automatic 40 damage. That was the inspiration for this thing. I was like, wait a second, really? Is that a real thing? I could use that in another situation. So even if it's like a really low level party, like fighting a troll, I will just say the troll hits you and you take average damage.
Yeah.
And like they don't get save, I don't make any rolls. Because sometimes you can always roll behind the screen for no reason to make them raise the tension another level. Sometimes not rolling raises it even more. It's one of my, it's probably bad, but it is one of my favorite things to do is to throw something that's way out of the party's league at them and give them the fear for their own mortality.
I think I have a thought on that, is that sometimes I love to just throw even even if I don't necessarily think the encounter is unwinnable, but just an unbelievably difficult encounter, because I think that sometimes that brings out the most creativity in your players when they're really struggling, like, oh my god, seems impossible, but I think we can do it. You see some wonderful creativity in their, spell use, item use, etc. And the other piece, I think, as far as communicating how powerful something is, you can also use, like, you can wipe out you can have your monster wipe out something of comparable power to your party really easily in front of them, and that's like, oh, okay, like they're with a troop of guards and this thing just eats like 40 knights, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, it just consumed, if you don't want to inflict a ton of damage on them, but you can use something else in your world that will give them an idea of the impact that this thing could have. You can use that to communicate the scale of danger, I guess.
Yeah, and like I mentioned it, I don't remember if this was on stream or off. I mentioned a time when I used the Tarrasque against a 4th level party.
Yeah.
And what I did for that was I realized that the Tarrasque has one serious weakness, and that is, in its actual stat block, its bite, which its mouth is enormous, like it could swallow a building, but its bite specifically says one target.
Wow.
So, like, it can only eat one creature at a time. So even no matter what, it's going to take like 5 rounds for this thing to actually kill the whole party. And I said, that's stupid. I'm just gonna roll this one attack that has a plus 19 to hit against you level 4 parties, and it's gonna be against all of you. Haha. So there is sometimes it's very obvious that something is unwinnable. This champion that they know that is the BBEG and they're way too low level, or the Tarrasque itself, or a dragon the size of the city that it's flying over, or something like that. Then it's not necessarily difficult to tell them, like, you're not supposed to in this.
You're
supposed to run.
And as well, presenting another option, like, whether it's giving them knowledge ahead of time, like that there is another way to go about this, and then they confront it and they already have that in the back of their head, like, oh, like we're in this situation, but someone already told us, like, we need to actually go do a bunch of things first. So presenting them an alternative, because sometimes when you're a player, you get faced with a monster and you're like, well, the only way forward is just to go through this monster, and that's it. That's the only option.
Exactly. One other thing that I really, really like in doing for like running from something, I know this is a little bit off tangent, but I made a video a while ago on chase encounters with examples of how I run these chases, and it's basically a skill challenge with a timer.
That's excellent.
And it's the most, like, every single time I announce that we're entering a chase sequence, players literally cheer. Those that know that have been in my campaigns for a while, they're like, yes!
Nice.
And that's always a great feeling. So I linked that in the chat for those of you that might be, and I will throw it into the description once we're here as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to try that. I'll have to try that in my next chase scene, because I think the imparting urgency is difficult sometimes in the turn structure of D&D, because you can just sit there forever and be like, well, maybe I'll do this, or maybe I'll do this.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like 6 seconds when turns take 5 minutes each.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next question, following up from our second one. What kind of player are you, Kelly? Specifically for you, are you a combat, min-maxer, puzzle solver, actor?
I am definitely not a min-maxer, but I do enjoy the build, but I definitely enjoy the RP. I think I'm a heavy RPer, and I I mean, at the end of the day, I really like making my friends laugh, so I like to do silly things and have silly RP conversations with them. So usually, the characters I play are not very serious. They're not. I'm not. I'm not a person to show up at, like, with some totally ridiculous. They're not. Well, you know what? I guess my party could really answer that if they're annoyingly ridiculous or not. But I try not to make them like that. I try to make them serious characters that are just, either full of themselves or silly in some way, and that I have fun playing. So yeah, to answer the question, definitely prioritize RP, but I also really do. I really do enjoy leveling and looking at spells. I have never played a non-caster. I mean, when Magic is out there, I have to play at least a partial caster. So
That's the cool part, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right now I'm playing an armorer artificer, and just the number of options is amazing. There's just so many different ways that you can go about playing that class, and so yeah, I RP, and then just below that, the crunch.
I think Alex probably already knows. He asked the question. Been hanging out in a lot of my chats recently, so thank you for joining this. Good to see you again. My particular playstyle over the years has changed drastically. I've visited all the polls to try to find out what I actually enjoy. I have yet to play every single D&D class. Working on that.
Yeah, me neither.
My favorite class so far is Barbarian.
Nice.
I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that can happen there, and the fact that you don't have to sit there and think about spells is fun for me, because that means I can focus on descriptions, what's happening in combat, and I don't want to split my brain power between those two things. I mean, it can work, but I like focusing on describing what's happening, and that's just the GM in me talking. But how I go through character creation now, what I found I enjoy the most is I find some weird rule, some strange combo that kind of sort of works, and I will build a character based on that. I think my most recent one was I realized that small creatures, it's not that they can't wield heavy weapons, it's that they have disadvantage on attacks with heavy weapons. So what I did was I made a gnome barbarian with a maul that he wielded, or I should say wielded him. And I just did reckless attack every single time.
Nice.
So no matter what the situation is, I had advantage and disadvantage and did a straight roll. So
That's
flanking isn't helpful. True strike never going to be helpful. Disadvantage for not being able to see them out the window. It's just a straight roll every time. And it was a really fun to describe how it wasn't he swings the maul and it just catapults him instead of the maul. That was really entertaining.
Yeah, that's very much like what is that, like Itchy and Scratchy from The Simpsons, like the little mouse with a giant hammer.
I think our next one is an actual rapid fire question. What is your go-to topping on pizza?
Oh, God, well, it's not that rapid. That's hard to choose. Like one single topping, or like my favorite pizza? One single topping?
Okay, let's make it two. If you could have any two topping pizza, what are you going to have?
I mean, I'm kind of a freak, so I'm gonna say olives.
That's valid.
I honestly, if there was an olive cheese pizza, I would eat it. And then, oh gosh, just a simple simple guy. So tomato and olives, like just kind of like a nice marguerite pizza. I would do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The classic like real Italian one.
Yeah. Well, eat it like with a knife and fork, like I'm pretending to be classy or something.
I'm also in that vein of like much prefer a that thin classic pizza over the thick greasy deep dish. Though both
Yeah.
definitely have their merits, I fully enjoy both. But if I had to choose,
Yeah.
I would choose the thinner one. And on either one, ever since I went to, I think we have a place up here called Punch Pizza.
Okay.
It is just they do exactly that. It's fire roasted, hand tossed,
Yeah.
thin pizza, and once I realized that basil is a common pizza topping, I can't
Yeah.
have pizza without it.
It's very good.
It
Yeah.
changes everything. It's amazing. So
It's
I'll
a game
have like
changer.
whether it's fresh basil or out of a shaker, I'll put it on whatever
Yeah.
pizza I'm having.
Nice.
But I feel like that's just a spice. That's not like an actual topping cases.
Yeah. I guess if you're gonna have a basil pizza, that might be overkill.
That's cheese pizza.
Yeah.
That doesn't count. But I would have to go with chicken actually, because
Nice.
my fiance who I live with is pescatarian, so vegetarian plus fish.
Yeah.
Which means I don't get a lot of chances to eat meat. So if I'm
Yeah.
getting pizza from a place, there's gonna be meat on it. My
Nice.
meat of choice
Yeah.
is chicken.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good. And there's so many different ways that you can do chicken, so you
Mhm.
can
There's
really
a
have
lot.
the variety. So, yeah.
All right. Question 4. Question 4 is pertinent because it leads to food. This question is, what are your go-to game snacks?
Oh, um, uh, in my group, there's a bit of I don't know that it's really an inside joke, but just that we have this weird obsession with sliced cucumber and hummus, and that is like at every single game, we will just devour like 3 to 4 cucumbers in slices. I don't know why. We all really like cucumber dipped in hummus. So that was a weird discovery when we all found that we like that. But otherwise, just a classic like kettle chip, some kind of actually salt and vinegar chips is another big one at our table. And then I think really just I don't know what's with the sour, but also sour keys or sour peaches.
Okay.
They're like a gummy candy. So
Mhm.
yeah, really run the gamut from vegetables all the way to sour candy.
Yeah. I like them. I most of the games I run are recorded or streamed, so if I could, I'd do kettle chips, but it
Yeah.
doesn't sound good on microphone.
Yeah,
Not at all.
that's fair.
We will still do popcorn. A little bit
Oh,
quieter.
nice.
Always a good bet. You can crap ton of it. Pretty cheap.
Yeah.
But we also have. We're tea drinkers, most of us.
Oh,
At least
nice.
at my in-person game. So we will always have people come over, their hot water ready. Got our cabinet stuff. It doesn't really count as a snack, but it is, definitely something.
Yeah.
Whether it's iced tea or hot tea. That's probably our. If we had one D&D consumption.
That's very nice. That's very cozy in the winter too. And
It's so nice.
Yeah.
Question 6. There is no question 6. Move along. Thank you, Alex. Question 7. How do you handle last-minute cancellation by a player? Ooh, this is a good one, because every group has to deal with at some point.
Yeah. And our group's way of going about it is not great, in which we just don't play. And I don't recommend that because then we sometimes don't play for a couple of weeks, which is not ideal. what we used to do, which we are not currently doing, but we used to have 2 simultaneous campaigns running, in which one was like just the secondary campaign, in which it was, I think we were running the Waterdeep campaign. It was a pre-written campaign. We were all, having fun with it, but it was more casual. And when someone couldn't make it for the main campaign, we played the second campaign. And if people weren't there for that, it didn't really matter. And we would run it in a way that was a little bit more, not episodic, but kind of that in nature, that there would be, things that we would do in a session and they would all tie up in a session. And then when the next session of that campaign played, we could easily fill in the other player that wasn't there. And that system worked pretty well for us. And it was also nice to have that when, sometimes just the main campaign, like if whoever was running the main campaign just wasn't prepped in time or just couldn't, whatever, had rough time at work and just wasn't into running, we had this fallback campaign. And so, obviously that only works if there are other DMs in your group, but that was a really great system that worked for us, just having this casual side campaign that we could just hop into, and it didn't matter if people weren't there.
Yeah, I like that. I've always wanted to try something similar, and I've never actually had the chance to, because mini-series and one-shots where you can't like play without that one player, it just doesn't.
Yeah.
So we have been going down the route of canceling campaigns only sessions.
Yeah.
But one thing that I really want to do and have not yet, because I heard about it since I stopped running longer campaigns, is that if 2 people can't make it, then we can't. If 1 person can't make it, we will play something else, play a different game, a different system.
Great.
Rules light, has to be rules light every time, so that you sit down and learn it real. Or we will play, we could play some other, like a board game if it's in person, or just hang out and talk, do like some video game if we're Jackbox or something, if you're
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do that a lot.
Yeah, so like if someone's missing, we'll just do that. And like I said, I phrase it like we've done it. I haven't yet, just so grain of salt to see whether it works or not, but in theory it could.
I love that idea of trying, because I really want to try more systems, but we, if everyone's there and showing up, we're gonna play the D&D campaign that we're playing. So I love that idea of having that rule, and especially a rules light where you can pick it up quickly. So that's a really great idea. I would like to try that.
Let me know how it goes if you
yeah.
All right, let's see. Last minute cancellation. What are your suggestions for designing memorable NPCs? This is a whole podcast episode. This is a topic that we could talk about for hours.
Yeah.
So, top 2 things for making memorable and.
Top 1 thing has got to be just a funny voice. Like anytime you do a funny voice, your party is going to be like,
talk like this.
Yeah, honestly, the NPCs that my party references and things, to me, even from past campaigns, are, at the end of the day, that's they love it. They can't get enough of it. So, for a memorable NPC, it doesn't give them necessarily a lot of depth, but they will probably remember it if you do a really weird voice. Even if it's not silly, if it's just weird, different, whatever. So I'd say definitely a unique voice. And I think just, I guess they don't always have to be sympathetic, but I would say that making them relatable in some ways will make your party latch onto them. Relatable, whether it's their situation, they can sympathize with whatever's happening to them. if they're in a tough spot, if they're being picked on, whatever that is, if you make that relatable to your players, I think they will latch onto that and not only want to probably bring them along, especially if you make them sympathetic, but I would say making them their situation relatable in a big way.
Yeah, I like that. I have a little bit of a cop-out answer for this one.
Okay.
So the question, what are your suggestions for designing memorable NPCs? Is don't. The NPCs that are going to be most memorable are the ones that your players design. Characters from their backstory.
Yes,
one of the reasons I love GMing so much is because I like being able to looking at all the players' backstories and tying them into the same story, tying them into one plot. And the NPCs from those backstories are always instrumental. And they always end up being, like, no matter what I try, like if I'm throwing my own character in, they will be forgotten eventually.
Yeah.
But like this character's father, who's the BBEG of one campaign, never gonna forget Lord Hargan, ever.
For sure.
There's also Shen, who imprisoned one of the other player characters in the Shadowfell one.
Very cool.
Never gonna forget that character. Not me, not the player who wrote them or invented them, and not anybody else at the time. So my suggestion is don't make your own NPC. Make them from what your players have already provided you. Or if you've already used all of that and you need to like fill in a shopkeeper, make it a shopkeeper that has some relation to the player. Family relations are easiest, but like know someone who knows someone else too.
Yeah, for sure. Or just like an aligned goal as well. If they, or just aligned views with whatever the party's doing, that's easy to give some commonality all of a sudden. If they, whatever you're trying to do, overthrow the empire or whatever, like, they're
the empire does
similar
suck.
views.
Like, let's do that. I'm on board. Tell me what to do. No, they're gonna tag along.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely don't think that's a cop-out answer. I think that's super, super valid. There's something magical about writing an NPC in your own backstory and then having that character brought to life in front of you and being able to actually interact with them. So I think that's absolutely huge to value those.
Building off of that, suggestions for building up big bad evil guys. I'm sticking to my same answer. Like I mentioned already, Lord Hargan was the big bad evil guy. It was the players' fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of other stuff that I'll think of and talk about later, but I'll hand it over.
Yeah, absolutely. Having it come from close to home is very good. I've definitely thought about this a lot, for sure. I mean, just like always want to make a satisfying villain, and the things that the conclusions that I've come to are you don't have to necessarily introduce them early, but introduce, like, I find it difficult if you go a whole campaign and like there's this villain out there doing these things and they're kind of always far away. And so I love, an encounter with the BBEG early on, even if it's not a combat encounter, but just that they, like, the party meets them in some way, if it's whatever, through dreams, through magic, physically, they can put a face to whoever, even if you're gonna twist that later. But I think introducing them early on and then having them be affecting the party as the campaign goes along is big, because I think one of the worst things that can happen is you get to the end and then this random guy, this random
It was
villain
me
steps
all
out.
along.
Yeah, yeah. Who are you? Where do you come from?
Yeah, it's not really
Yeah,
it's not really a satisfying climax.
yeah. So I would say introduce them early, and then, I mean, the second part I think is just it helps if you are friends with your players and you know what really irks them as people.
Ooh.
So, maybe, but then you just, like, what do they hate? Do they hate, the establishment as people? Then, you know, make that as your villain. So I think knowing your players is going to help you develop a villain that really prods them in all the places that are just going to make
Pushes
them
every wrong
hate
button.
them. Yeah.
No, that's a good one. I definitely echo your first point for sure. Introduce them early, reintroduce them often. The players are always thinking.
Yeah.
That's how to build them up well. Doesn't really matter how you introduce them or what they're doing or what their interactions are, as long as the introductions are meaningful in some way, even if it's only meaningful to like one of them.
Sure.
As long as it happens often. Could be every session. Like that could work. Might get old after a while. I haven't tried an every session one myself yet, but like every other session, sure that Archon the Cruel is there.
Yeah.
Affecting things that the players are
doing.
Yeah. Let's see. Question number 8-ish. Number 8 from Alex, at least. What are your sources of inspiration for crafting stories? Do you mine officially published materials, pull arcs from famous literature like Professor DM, pull from movies? What is your inspiration for?
Yeah, all of the above, and it changes often with whatever I'm interested in. If I watched, Game of Thrones, all of a sudden I was like, whoa, well, I run all these storylines. These are great. Or just like, I would say I pull from everything. I don't, to the point of mining from pre-written stuff, I don't intentionally seek it out. I think it's just the media that I consume. I get inspiration from it, and it depends when I go through phases of whatever I'm consuming at that time. Different ideas will come to me, and I doesn't necessarily come in the form of specifics, but more just like more general, as far as what kind of twists there were and what sort of, looking at maybe a villain in whatever media I'm consuming and just trying to analyze what made them a good villain. They were sympathetic, but then also they were doing these terrible things, and just analyzing the media that I really enjoy, then looking back at it and going, why did I enjoy it? So yeah, just from the stuff that I'm consuming all the time. But no, I don't specifically, although that is a great way to do it for sure, is to go and look at pre-written campaigns and go like, well, this is sweet. Like, I'm going to take this and put it in my campaign. That is a great way to do it for sure. But I don't currently do that.
I do very much the same thing. First and foremost, it's the media I'm consuming, the actual stories that I'm watching. When I think they're good, I'll take a step back and say, wait a second, why was that awesome? Right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily mining for content, but digging into this one specific thing and figuring out why that villain in that book is so freaking cool. Why am I so engaged with this story whenever that person's on screen? And that's like, it's something I've always loved doing, and it is one of the deepest connections I have with my fiance, because we do that all the time. We will, like, every night we'll sit down, watch something, and talk about the story as it's happening on the screen. Like, oh my god, that was fantastic, the villain, and we'll talk about the actual story beats and how they're being used, you know, like, even if it's like, or we'll talk about why it's bad. That's also extremely fun. Like, we'll have
And
some
valuable.
drinks, sit down, watch a terribly reviewed movie, and say, okay, why did this get bad reviews? Well, because there's nothing compelling about the villain. They're not relatable, and you know, like, you can still draw inspiration from that. Sometimes I'll like say, okay, this story had so much promise, I'm going to redo that in my world better.
Nice.
So
that's
like
cool.
that, like, inspiration comes from every single other story that you consume. Not so much from real life experiences, unless you're doing like descriptions. Then you need that, because like, you know, describing what it's like to walk into a cold room. Just for example, you've done that before. Everyone's done that before. So describe what it feels like, the temperature change, what the things in the room look like, what the smells are. And that's for inspiration, at least. That's where
I love the idea of redoing something that you didn't think was good. I think that that hadn't occurred to me. I think that's a very cool thing to do, because that happens when you see something bad. You're like, why was that bad? And if you can put your finger on it, be like, actually, they could have done this. I'm gonna do that. Yeah, that's cool.
Awesome. That was a fun one. Let's see. Next, Alex says, no excuses, answer them all. Well, we've got 5 minutes left until we plan to stop. I think we can rapid fire. We've only got a couple more. What is your favorite style of session to run? Dungeon crawl, mystery, tavern crawl, shopping trip?
Well, my players do not like playing dungeon crawls, and I've tried to run a few, and they didn't engage with it, and so it didn't go well. So I think I would like to run one with the right group, but it hasn't been successful so far. They run into, I try not to do them too much, otherwise we never get anywhere in the story. So those are fun when they're sprinkled few between.
Just a few shopping trips, not every episode.
Yeah, no, I try, if there's too many shopping things, I try to deal with it between sessions. Like, hey, just tell me what you want to do, and you can just do it. We have to do some actual campaign stuff. As far as what I think, honestly, my favorite type of session would be one that I find really balanced, and I kind of strive to have a good role-play encounter, a good combat encounter, and then an interesting piece of lore be delivered, and that's kind of like my ideal session if those three things can happen. So I guess I would prefer a session where all of those things happen, if I can make it.
That's a good set to aim for sure. For me, favorite style of session, honestly, is between combat and roleplay, whichever one the last one wasn't. So like, I alternate between the two. If last session was 2.5 hours of combat and 30 minutes of talking, then that's what we'll do. I think my favorite combination for any single session, though, is a little bit of a structure where they go role play, find out what's going on. Like initial, if this is a video game, the quest giving. Role play through that, talk about it, decide that yes, this is what we're going to do. And then most of the session is caught up with going to a place and investigating it, and watching the players piece together what's happening in the story, and like who was here, what happened, if like they're investigating a crime scene, or if they're diving into find some ancient whatever, like what lore is on the walls, what are they learning about the world. That's most of the session, and then I sometimes I do this too often, but I always like to end it with, you know, a monster appearing, like something that they know and recognize, the combat that they were expecting finally happens, and then we'll end the session right there and start next time with rolling initiative.
Yeah, that's very good. And I forgot that a mystery was one of the options, and I don't currently, but I've really been thinking a lot lately about what makes a good mystery. You know, how to really feed information in a satisfying way, just doling out little pieces so that it's obscure enough, but it doesn't feel. There's such a fine balance, I think, between you know, doling out too much information in which your players just go, oh, okay, well, it's obviously this, and then not doling out enough information where they're like, well, I have no idea what's going on, I don't know what we're supposed to do. And we were watching, speaking of Dimension 20, the older series, the Mice and Murder. It was a mystery series that they did. It was basically a murder mystery. It was the whole thing, and they were all in a house together, and I was just really fascinated watching Brennan really dole out interesting clues in different ways that would just seem like the right amount of red herrings that sent them off into little tangents, but then in the end they're gonna piece it all together about what happened. And so I would love to run better mysteries.
I think running mysteries with an improv style is very difficult, because you make up new things, because your players are going to, and they have more brains than you do, so that was always my struggle with why I don't run mysteries that often. I've been at tables where like one of my best friends has run a really, really cool mystery. We were investigating a drug ring and trying to find the person at the top and arrest them.
Very cool.
And we were trying to find which of these stores is the front for this, and all of these. He showed it to me later. It was like a 30-page document. Everything that was like laid out about all, like, these 6 shops are red herrings, these are the wrong answers, this one is going to be the correct one, and he had this super detailed, well laid plan, and was like ready for us to jump into that plan and like blindly search around until we like could grab onto something tangible. And he did, it was his planning, I think, that really, really made that fun. And that is exactly the opposite of what kind of session I like. I'm never gonna walk into a room with a 30-page document for one session. That's insane to me. But he doesn't run sessions any other way, and he's never going to. Like, there are different styles that I think align themselves better to being able to run a mystery. Fortunately, improv isn't really one of them. It's doable, it's just really hard.
Yeah, no, I think if I was to go about it, I would maybe not 30 pages, but something like that for sure. I would lay everything out, and I would like to try that. But it's definitely not something I would do regularly, but trying it, I would be, just try as many different things as you can, then you know what you do and don't like.
All right, bit over time. I think we got one more question, I think. No, 2 more questions. Nope, 1 more question. It's late, and I'm having difficulty counting to 2, apparently. Okay. How much attention do you pay to character traits and backgrounds, i.e., urchin, acolyte, criminal. This will be our last question.
I guess it would depend on how much weight the player put on it, but most of the time, almost none, unless it's part of their backstory. I think when we've been creating characters, it doesn't. I mean, aside from an extra language or some minor thing, like the backstories and traits really don't mechanically have any advantage. So we generally just kind of randomly pick them and then write our own backstories. So, but if my players went about choosing a mechanical backstory to fit their backstory, then I would put more weight on that. But I guess it would really depend on what the player was doing, and I would always take what their creative backstory is over the mechanical options that they chose, just based because I think that would be more important to them. But if there are a lot of, or not a lot, there are some more third-party backstories and stuff that I saw recently that seemed to actually do cooler things than the ones that are just in 5e standard. So I think if you're using some of those that actually had cool mechanical advantages, then I would put more weight on them. But for now, they don't seem to do much.
I'm in the same boat. In fact, I really don't care. Backstories, I do care what backstories. I do not care what backgrounds.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not. I don't even like look at the ones in the book anymore. My game designer brain starts to pick them apart and realize, okay, what does every single one have? Money?
Yeah.
It gives you maybe a language or something. It gives you a pack, some cool equipment, and it gives you two trained skills. That's it. So I'll just let them pick those 4 things themselves to fit into their backstory, and like they can put a name on it if they want. Backgrounds don't give any mechanical benefit at all, other than starting equipment and those 2 skills. That's it. It's all passive. There's no like consumable ability. You can't learn a spell from a background. So yeah, same boat. I pretty much ignore them.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I think, and I don't know what I would like to see. I think because I find oftentimes when I'm building a character, I don't find a background in there that suits the backstory that I'm trying to make. And so I think instead of trying to like, have this little box that you have to pick from, they could just kind of, make some tables accessible to you that you could kind of mix and match and pick your own, and just like you said, boil it down to the mechanical level of like, you can pick 3 of these things. Do you want an extra language? Do you want whatever, a skill proficiency or whatever? And then, you can make up your own. You don't have to, or have them have greater mechanical impact, but yeah, in their current state, they're just kind of nothing.
Well, thank you very much for joining. It's a good time.
Thank you for having me.
Covered so many bases. I hope we can do this again at some point. That would be amazing.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you listening, for sticking around, both those that are listening live and those that are afterward. To all of you, I hope you have an excellent rest of your day, rest of your night. Happy time zone, and remember, everything is going to be. Talk to you guys later.